So to those of you who are here, welcome. This is our first of hopefully many updates from our program staff about various programs that we have here at Refuge Point. And so we'd love your feedback after this if this is something that you've felt is useful or helpful to you to learn more about what we're doing. A few logistics before we get started. Like I said, we are recording this. It will be available on demand afterwards, and I'll be sending an email out to all the participants so you'll have that and you can share that with anyone you would like. We will save time for a Q&A at the end. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see something that says Q&A. That is where we'd like you to put your questions in. So instead of the chat function on the side, please don't put questions there as much as possible. Try to put them into the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that throughout. And Kylie, who's our major gifts officer, you can't see her, I don't think, but she'll be behind the scenes answering some questions as they come in. And then at the end, we'll be answering some live as well. If there are questions we don't get to, we will try to respond to them via email after this as well. I think that is all. This is also might be streaming live on Facebook if that is working. It's hard to say. This is our first time doing that. But if it is streaming on Facebook, you'll be able to share it from there afterwards as well. So now for the good part, I want to introduce Sasha Chanoff, who is our executive director and founder. He's also the co-author of the book, From Crisis to Calling, Finding Your Moral Center in the Toughest Decisions, and he will be moderating the conversation today. Hand it over to you, Sasha.
Thanks, Sarah. It's great to welcome you, Sarah, as Refuge Point's new Director of Development. Amazing that you started in the midst of all of this. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I can't tell you how thrilling it is to see so many people who've joined us. Good morning to everybody in the US and Canada. Good afternoon to everybody in Europe and Africa. It's really particularly special and delightful to see board members, founding board members, amazing foundation partners, and so many incredible supporters, including people who started supporting us when Refuge Point started in 2005, and so many others who are interested in our work. So thank you all for joining us and for your commitment and care and support. I wanted to start just by briefly telling you a little about Refuge Point, although most of you already know what we do. But we essentially help the most at-risk refugees find solutions. And we do this in two ways. One is through refugee resettlement and complementary pathways. That is helping refugees permanently and legally get from one place to a country where they can rebuild their lives safely. And the other is by helping refugees to become self-reliant. We do our work by helping refugees directly, but we also have what we think of as a systems change component to our work, where we train other organizations, we forge collaborative efforts, and we work closely with the UN Refugee Agency and other partners to improve and expand resettlement and self-reliance opportunities far beyond the scope of our own direct operations. In our resettlement work, we have at any one time up to about 40 staff in 25 countries or so across Africa and the world, helping refugees who can't stay safely in those places, including many unaccompanied minors. We've helped to date 84,682 refugees directly access resettlement, and we've contributed in various ways to the resettlement of over 1 million people since we started. Our self-reliance work takes place at our flagship program in Nairobi, where we have over 60 staff who identify refugees in extremely difficult circumstances, including female single-headed households, refugees from LGBTIQ communities, unaccompanied minors, survivors of violence, and others with particular vulnerabilities. We help them to become stable and ultimately to get on their own 2 feet so they don't have to depend on aid anymore. We reach about 10,000 people a year, and we've helped many thousands graduate from needing support. Based on the successes that we've had in Nairobi, we've also created a global effort called the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative in collaboration with the Women's Refugee Commission and over 25 other partners to reach refugees around the world with opportunities to support themselves so they don't have to depend on erratic aid. We've been operating in Nairobi, where we started since 2005, and we've built really close relationships with refugee households and communities there. We also have many refugee leaders who are on staff as focal points for the communities we serve. Everyone is feeling the impact of COVID-19, which has upended all of our lives, and it's in particular upended and devastated many refugees and has a huge impact on refugee communities. The countries hosting the vast majority of the world's refugees are not equipped well to help their own populations, let alone refugees. Most refugees in camps and cities don't have the possibility of social distancing. There is not enough access to hygiene or even running water. But right now, there's still an opportunity to prepare. Right now, for whatever reason, many countries have not been hit as hard as in the US and Europe. And so there's an opportunity to help keep people alive, to help them survive, to help get information to people, and to help move through this as positively and as possible. The purpose of this call is to share with you how COVID-19 is impacting refugees in Nairobi and how RefugePoint is responding. So we have two people who are joining me on this call, and I'm so thrilled to have them here. One is Anne-Marie Manishimwe, who's a refugee leader and who works with RefugePoint as a community navigator. And the other is Jacob Bonyo, who is RefugePoint's country director, our fearless country director in Nairobi. So I'd like to start, Anne-Marie, by going to you, and I wanted you just to introduce yourself a little more to our audience today. Tell us a little about yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Manishimwe Anne-Marie. I'm a refugee from Rwanda who lived most of my life in DRC, and I arrived here in Kenya in 2009 with my family of 9 people. And currently I'm working with RefugePoint as a community navigator, working on the ground in the community, and also as a student doing masters in counseling psychology.
So Anne-Marie, you're
as a community, yes, yeah. I was going to say as a community navigator in RefugePoint, I do identify needy and vulnerable households in the community. I conduct assessments, home visit assessments for needs. And also in the organization, I provide language translation and interpretation services, collecting medical prescriptions from refugees and distributing drugs to them. Also accompanying RefugePoint staffs in the community to show them the different households. And also sometimes I'm required to accompany a patient to the hospital and also to tell RefugePoint what is happening on the ground, and also to inform refugees about, to give general information and trustworthy information to refugees about whatever might be going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne-Marie, and you said that you're pursuing a master's degree in counseling and psychology, and you told me earlier in your second semester of that, and where did you get your bachelor's degree?
I got it from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa here in Kenya, and I did a bachelor's degree in social work. In social work. And you also told me, I just wanted to share with people a little more about you. You told me a little about your mom and your dad and how they're real inspirations to you. Can you tell me, just tell us a little about who they are? Well, yes, my parents have actually been a great inspiration in this process. And they say education is one imperishable heritage they can give to us as children. So my mom is actually a medical doctor, and my dad was a teacher, but now what he was doing ended. He was teaching French and has taught me personally in different areas, even classes. So yes, and mainly the source even of my education was from my mom's work, because she'll get some money, get a loan as I'm pursuing a semester. She repays that one, then she will request another one, but that has been greatly impacted by COVID-19. I'm not sure of what will be next.
Yeah, and you told me that when your family arrived in 2009, that RefugePoint was working with you then and your family, and you were a teenager at that time.
Oh yes, I can remember. My God, it was really, when I remember, I used to even to go with my elder sister and brother to pick the food. So we arrived, it was very uncertain. We didn't know what to do. It was a strange land. And by then, my parents were doing nothing. So Refuge Point gave us food, and we were able to survive and to have hope for even a better future. And we've seen it. Yes.
And you were sharing with me earlier that your family, many members of your family have worked at one time or another. And from that point where you were receiving food, your family did manage to get on its own 2 feet for many, many years, thanks to your mom and what she was doing as a doctor, and thanks to your dad. And you and your family are actually a great example of what is possible with people who fled their homes and arrive in another country, to establish yourselves, to support yourselves, to contribute to your communities. So you're not just helping other people, you're an inspiration to others there. Tell me, Anne-Marie, what are some of the impacts of COVID-19? We know that right now, Nairobi is largely in a lockdown. We know that cases are spreading there. We know that there's a lot of fear. Share what this has meant for you. How has it impacted you and your family?
Yes, I am directly impacted, like I was sharing. Now my mom is actually on a forced leave, and that was following even other months of unpaid work, but which was accentuated by the situation. So that means I'm not able to register for a new semester, which is to be in June. And also all my siblings, the 4 who are behind me, are high school students, who is also at home, and of course not generating anything. But again, to generate food without a source of income is very difficult, because also my sister was doing some business, but she's not able to move around. And even where she was getting the things, the place is locked. It's a place called Isli in Nairobi. Then my brother, he's married and he has a kid who is turning 1 year this May. But the better half of March and even April, she was sick and admitted in the hospital. And we thank God she was healed, but she left a huge bill of over 300,000 Kenyan shillings, on top of what we managed to pay through the NHIF and other friend support. But now that is a very huge thing, and yet the family has no source of income. So paying the bills, rent, and getting food for the huge family as such, it's really very difficult, like any refugee family for now.
Yeah, I think the things you're experiencing, so you just shared that your education has been cut off, that your family doesn't have enough money to support your education, that your siblings who are in high school don't have access to education anymore, but that the primary concern is about getting food on the table and paying rent. And we've heard those things among others as well. So if you look outside of your family to the community, I know that there's some really devastating things that have happened in Nairobi. We know, for example, so terribly and tragically that one refugee took his own life there a number of weeks ago, and it was reflective of the fear and desperation that people are facing there. Can you share a little more about what you're seeing in the community and some of the really harsh realities of COVID-19 and the impact on refugees there?
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. Actually, the situation now for refugees in Nairobi is quite frustrating. It's a very anxious and stressful time for every refugee family. That refugee who took his own life was actually from one of the areas, the community where I serve. So it was very frustrating, and information say it was linked to lack of food and other basic necessities. So the worst thing, hearing when it is already happened, it was even worse. And it is a picture of what is happening in silence to many refugee families. So also many of the refugee families, their businesses have been severely impacted. So they have no source of income, which is causing difficulty in paying the bills, rent. Some families, in fact, they get in touch to me personally from my area. So they have difficulty to bring food on the table for the children as well. And some, in relation to rent, some have received warnings that they will be kicked out or be handed over to auctioneers. So that is really what is happening in many refugee families.
And Anne-Marie, lastly, I know that when we spoke before, you shared that there was a rising increase in sexual and gender-based violence against women. Can you share a little more about that or what you're seeing?
Yes, with this increased lockdown and people just remaining in the house, many things are happening. Some reports have reached to us and to me personally that some refugees were hurt, like for the intent of sexual harassment. Others, there is violence in the household, which I link to frustration and inability to bring anything in the house and even for the children. So that there is an increase compared to prior to COVID-19, and it's a major concern in Kenya and significantly in Nairobi.
Mm-hmm. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for sharing this very personal perspective on what's happening with your family and with the refugee communities in Nairobi. I want to now turn to Jacob, our country director. And Jacob, I'd like, maybe you can just introduce yourself briefly, and then I'd like you to take us up to a kind of 1,000-foot brief overview of Nairobi and Kenya as well. But why don't we start with who you are?
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for attending today. I know during these times there are a lot of webinars, so I feel really privileged to be able to engage with you on this particular one. As we would say in Nairobi, karibuni sana, which means welcome. My name is Jacob, as other panelists have said. I'm the country director in Nairobi, and I have worked in the field of refugees generally for about 16 years now. 13 of those years I was in refugee resettlement, primarily working with the US Refugee Admissions Program. And for the remainder of the time, I have had the privilege to work with RefugePoint. Today, I'm really humbled and privileged to be able to present the perspective of an amazing team of about 62 people who've been responding to the COVID crisis and continuing to support refugees throughout. I'll start with a bit of background about refugees in Kenya before dialing into Nairobi generally. Kenya has hosted refugees for a really long time, beginning, I think, with the Somali crisis in about 1992. Currently, there are slightly over 494,000 refugees in the country. We continue to see more arriving on a continual basis from Eastern Congo, from South Sudan, and a few from Somalia, mostly. Majority of those refugees are in the refugee camps, which are 2 in the country, and that's because Kenya has got an encampment policy where refugees are expected to be in the camps. However, from when the first refugees, I think even before the first refugees arrived in country, we have had refugees living in urban areas. And currently, there are about 16% of the refugee population is in the urban areas, or in absolute numbers, that's about 81,000 individuals. One of the challenges with the urban areas is just the sprawl of the locations that refugees live in. And so getting to all of those clients to be able to offer support as necessary is just a logistical challenge. And on top of that, there is an underlying expectation that a refugee in the urban setting should be able to take care of at least some of their living expenses. So in the urban settings, I do not believe that people get 100% support.
Jacob, can I just ask, what are the reasons that refugees then go to Nairobi if they can receive support in the camps and food and other assistance in the camps? Why do they not just all stay in the camps? Why are they in Nairobi?
Absolutely. I think 2 main factors would be the contributors for this. First is protection concerns. There are refugees who, for any variety of reasons, cannot go to the camp and have to stay in Nairobi. The second is economic opportunity. The urban areas do have a bit more or a lot more advantage in terms of ways to earn income, ways to earn a living than living in the camps. And so for those clients who feel that they will take a long time getting support in the camp, the urban area does become an alternative. We also have some clients in the urban areas because of medical concerns. People need access to continual Medicare that they can only get in the urban setting. And education is also a big reason for some clients. They move to the urban settings because their children or other important family members are accessing education opportunities.
Thanks, Jacob. And you were going on to talk about and add to Anne-Marie's perspective of what's happening in Nairobi and the impact of COVID-19.
Yes. Refugees in Nairobi, or the overwhelming majority of our clients, tend to be very, very vulnerable. Some people refer to them as ultra poor. Some people would say they live on the fringes of society. And in the settings that a lot of our clients live in, the effects of COVID have been especially devastating. The first case was only confirmed in Kenya on the 13th of March. Right now, we are slightly over 700 individuals confirmed with COVID-19, but the response to that has been, as almost anywhere else in the world, the reduction in movement, requirements for people to try and work from home, practice social distancing, and we have seen knock-on effects that have led to a serious constriction in the economy. And so for most refugees who were living in the urban areas, they've lost their sources of income, or those have seriously dwindled. The knock-on effect of that on individuals has been an astronomical increase in the needs around basics like food, shelter, in some instances, just security. And this is also coming on the backdrop of people having more mouths to feed in most cases, because schools were closed as part of the response. And so in addition to the daily household members who were there while others were accessing school, that number has now increased significantly to mean that the households have got more daily living expenses at a time when their incomes have reduced drastically. Some of the things that we have seen at a societal level that have been a bit challenging is a pandemic during a time that we're living in where social media is so accessible and information flows around very easily, or has also led to what some people are referring to as an infodemic, where we have got a lot of misinformation floating around about COVID-19, about who can suffer from it, about what needs to be done to counter it. And unfortunately for a lot of refugees, because of their living circumstances, they do not have direct access to the most reliable sources. Because to get information from WHO, you need access to internet, you need a gadget that can actually access that. And most of our clients do not have that. So people rely on in a lot of instances, misinformation that they're getting from their peers and their neighbors. And that definitely creates additional challenges on top of everything else.
Thanks.
Hold there a bit, Sasha, it looks like you want to talk.
Yeah, no, great, Jacob. And I know part of the context in Nairobi, which hosts over, I think you said, or about 80,000 refugees, and is one of the largest cities hosting refugees in the world. And this movement toward urban areas and cities is growing around the world. There's a majority of refugees in the world who are in cities as opposed to camps. And we know that in Nairobi, COVID-19 is not only impacting Nairobi and Kenya, but there have been locust swarms, unprecedented locust swarms triggered by climate change in Kenya that are impacting food and raising prices there, as well as rains right there. So it feels like there's a lot of shocks happening right now, and refugees, and particularly those we serve, are impacted. So I'd like to turn to both of you and hear more about what RefugePoint's response is. To date, what we've done, or overall what we've done with our program, is to find people who are the most at risk, to help stabilize them, to help get them on their own 2 feet through businesses and other income generating ways, so that they don't need to support themselves, and so they don't need our support, and so we can then move on to support others. And that's the trajectory that we've seen works. But today we see that there are emergency needs. So how has RefugePoint changed or switched directions in some way to address those needs? Jacob, maybe you can say a few things about that. And I'd like to also hear, Anne-Marie, your perspective on what you're doing directly, specifically.
Absolutely. We focused our response in 3 general areas. We looked at our client base and those who are most vulnerable. And then we looked at what kind of support would be possible for the general client base. And lastly, tried to look at what it is that we could do with other players in the sector to ensure that there is a sector-wide synchronized response. So when looking at our own clients, as I said earlier, we identified the most vulnerable. These are people who had got mostly pre-existing medical conditions. We distributed immunity boosters to all of those, in addition to food and general information about the disease. We continue to check in on that most vulnerable group regularly on a weekly basis. One of the staff members with a medical background is reaching out to all of them, just ensuring that they're still healthy. In response to the increasing need and the reduction in income, we have expanded food and rent assistance to a lot of clients. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had 1,300, almost 1,400 clients in our core caseload, and we've expanded our response to ensure that all of those can get a food basket and some rent assistance for a period of 3 months, which is when we expect the worst of the pandemic to hit. We've also looked through our caseload to identify clients who are on continuing medication. And for all of those, stockpiled at least 2 months supply of medication to ensure that people could shelter in place, still receive the medication that their lives depend on, and not be exposed to the risk of continued infection. One of the things that we identified was that while washing with soap and water is very effective to stem the risk of infection, most of our clients did not have ready access to water that they could use. And so we purchased rudimentary hand wash stations. We distributed those to all of the clients I've mentioned earlier. We distributed soap, and we also gave clients a stipend to be able to buy additional water to enable them to actually do the hand washing, because where most of them live, water is rationed, and so a lot of clients cannot continually do that.
Thanks. And Anne-Marie, you're really on the front lines of this. You, as a community navigator, so many people know you, turn to you for support, turn to you for help, for advice. What are you doing specifically, and how are you acting and working in the midst of this pandemic?
Thank you, Sasha. In addition to what Jacob said, we, as the community, and we responded directly and promptly to the situation. So we shifted the way we used to provide our services. So with regard to medication and other services, we ensure to create WhatsApp groups where clients can still share their prescription, which are sent to the medical team. Then medication come to us, and we are able to distribute still. Another thing that is being done, people are still calling, and many of them. And what we try to do, of course, is send the access through the phone, and of course, communicate to the supervisors. We still hope one day there will be support. If a case is very compelling, I'm sure the office finds a way, but it is very difficult. So we still receive cases and cry for assistance each and every day. We try to document from the community. This I'm saying we, because that is what is happening in all the areas that we serve. Then we share the compelling cases for any possible future assistance. And yeah, try to keep in touch with the community, trying to refer where possible. Maybe if there is another organization that can, although all the organizations are in such situations, what we do is just keeping up to date the organization and on the very compelling needs and cases.
Sasha, could I just add one more item that I think is really important? One other thing that we have done is to disseminate information to our clients about the disease, how measures that can be taken to prevent it, and the government directives. And we do this through a bulk SMS system that goes out twice a week, reaches around 5,000 individuals with each SMS blast that we send out. And we tailor the messages to our refugee clients, translating them into 4 to 5 different languages that they speak, depending on the message. And this has definitely helped to counter a lot of the misinformation and has also helped us keep clients up to date with the ever-evolving government directives. We also opened feedback channels and through the community navigators like Anne-Marie and other staff members, clients were able to provide feedback on the information that they were receiving. And this has definitely helped us to tweak our response to make sure it's more effective.
Yeah. Anne-Marie, do you feel safe enough in your work? No, I didn't ask you that in the preparation call we had a few days ago, but here in the US, it's the frontline staff who are risking themselves to support others. In New York, every day at 7 p.m., people get out on their balconies and cheer for all the frontline staff who are supporting others. And you are a frontline person supporting others. Do you feel safe enough in terms of your life and what you're doing right now?
So far, RefugePoint has done all they can to supply the PPEs that, the protective gears that we need and I need from the community level. So I have all the equipment. All I do is just trying to observe the measures, keep distance, and just be very vigilant. The only problem is just that the increased need that makes people like feel frustrated. Like sometimes they don't understand because we have clients who are already in the system who are able to receive some support. But again, I understand that the organization is not able like to pick everyone in support, everyone who is very needy at this time. So there's that kind of frustration. They're asking like, you are giving food, we are not getting. So that concern is there. And even some are crying that hunger might actually harm them before COVID. So that is a major concern. But the office has done enough to make sure from the community, I am and my colleagues are protected.
Thank you. Sarah, I know that we have some questions that we may want to get to, but I want to say a few other things first, picking up on what you said, Anne-Marie, about the needs across Nairobi. And that is that we recognize today that no one is safe until everyone is safe. We also recognize that no one organization is going to be able to do everything that needs to be done. There's more of a necessity right now on collaboration, on coming together with different organizations so that there can be a collective response. And there's also a necessity right now to get resources to the ground where they're needed and to support refugees and refugee-led organizations. So the UN Refugee Agency is raising funds right now that they intend and have started to distribute to NGOs across the world. But we haven't seen really many collective efforts beyond that to highlight the collective action that needs to happen. And so one of the steps that RefugePoint is taking right now is we have asked different agencies in Nairobi to collectively put information together on what they're doing. And organizations like Refugee and IRC and RefugePoint and others have already signed up, as well as many refugee-led organizations with which we work. And so we want to be able to highlight this to philanthropic communities so we can represent more of a collective response, because it's so vital that we act in concert together to address COVID-19 and more broadly to address global refugee challenges. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you for a moment, because I know right now we've left some time for questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a couple questions that have come in. And just as a reminder, if you do have an additional question, put it in that Q&A at the bottom of the screen. If we can't get to it right now, we will send an email with responses. Okay, so one of the questions is about what are the specific needs, challenges in getting food, supplies, basic needs to urban refugees, and also what sort of health access is provided to those communities?
Well, let me maybe just start by saying one thing, and then I'll turn it over to Jacob and Anne-Marie to fill in. But Refuge Point has this holistic program that ultimately helps people get on their own 2 feet. But part of it is social work, case management, health services. But over many years, we actually worked with the Kenyan Ministry of Health, and we advocated successfully for refugees to have access to the National Health Insurance Fund, which Anne-Marie referenced earlier. And so now the majority of refugees in Nairobi, among the 80,000 refugees there, have access to the National Health Insurance Fund. And because of that, they have access to the same health services that Kenyan nationals have. But Jacob, why don't we turn to you, Anne-Marie, first? Do you want to shed a little more light on how people are managing to get food and assistance? And maybe to shape that question a little, have you seen any success stories or stories of resilience in this time of desperation?
Thank you. That is to me.
Yeah, sure. You could start, and then I'll turn to Jacob. Have you seen any success or stories of resilience or people who are managing despite COVID-19?
Well, there are quite few who just, especially in business, who manage to shift from one business to another, which is relevant for COVID-19. Like I know one who was selling second-hand clothes for children, and now has added mask business, local masks in his business, and at least is able to get an extra sale and maybe help 1 or 2 refugees with masks, those who cannot afford.
Mm-hmm. Jacob, would you add to that? Can you share a story of resilience or ways that refugees are actually managing?
Absolutely. One of the ones that stories that really surprised me was of a lady we have in our caseload who's the breadwinner in a household of 7 people. She's living with her husband who has got a medical challenge and limited mobility as a result of that, her brother-in-law, and 4 children between the ages of 2 to 11. The whole family fled from the DRC in 2016 when they were attacked and had to leave their homes, arrived in Kenya in October of that year, and had been surviving on and off since then. They were introduced to us in June of last year, and that was especially when the lady's husband, who had up till that point been the sole breadwinner, underwent a medical procedure that really limited his motion, and he then could no longer provide for the family. So we engaged, supported them with core services as shelter support, food support, helped to put the children in education, helped to assist the husband with his medical challenges. And finally, for the lady, who I'm calling Jane for purposes of this webinar, took her through our in-house business training and gave her a grant to start a business. What she did with that money was that she bought vitenge, which is African fabric, and started selling that to people in her community. Later on, she approached us again and asked for an additional fund because she had managed to save some money. And with that additional fund and she was able to buy a second-hand motorcycle that she put to work in a taxi business. When COVID came, it really quickly devastated both of those business lines because of reduced income and reduction in mobility. And after a short while, what Jane realized was that all the tailors she knew did not have fabric because 1, supplies had run out, and secondly, people were afraid of traveling around looking for the material that they needed. So she quickly determined that that was a gap she could fill, educated herself on what she needed to do to take care of herself, make sure that she could avoid getting infected, and then went out looking for the sources, and is now supplying all the other tailors in her community and beyond with fabric for them to use in their businesses. The last time we touched base with her, early this month, she said that business is booming.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Jacob. It makes me think here in the US, there have been studies done that show that refugees and immigrants are more entrepreneurial than Americans. And we see that among refugees in Nairobi, when given an opportunity, have this entrepreneurial spirit that I think is underpinned by an urgency to survive, but then results in the kind of stories that you're sharing. Sarah, do you want to go to another question?
Sure. Yeah, so there's a question around the conversation. I think Anne-Marie and Sasha, you were talking about an increase in cases of sexual and gender-based violence due to the COVID-19 situation. Has there also, or do you know if there's also been an increase in exploitation in general?
It's a good question. Let's just keep the answers to about 30 seconds each because we're coming to the end of our webinar. But Anne-Marie, have you seen an increase in exploitation right now in addition to the sexual and gender-based violence?
I feared they might be, although maybe not in the open, because now, because of the lockdown, what is happening with the people silently might not be known, but because of lack of resources and opportunities, people are trying to survive. So there are chances, even if it had not yet happened, maybe, but people are exposed to that risk.
Yeah. Jacob, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I would only say that it's very likely, but it's also so early in the situation that we do not know for sure. All we know is there has been an increase in cases of SGBV.
Yeah. Thank you. I know that there may be other questions, and sadly, we won't be able to get to all of them. Sarah, if there's one more you'd like to interject, we can take 20 seconds to respond, or I can share some closing remarks.
I think if it's okay, I think we can email responses to the final questions, and then
Great. Yeah.
Go.
So Anne-Marie, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to spend a little time with you now and when we had the prep call for this. You're a real inspiration to us. So please give our best to your family and thank you for everything you do for the community. You're a guiding light. And Jacob, thank you to you too. I want to share with everybody that right now, so much travel has shut down that the idea of supporting people where they are in place is even more important. And the idea of getting people support so they can survive through COVID-19 and move forward after that to support themselves is vital. If you look broadly at the 20th and 21st centuries, you see that the primary response to refugees has been kind of an emergency response. People flee their homes and they get tents and food and emergency aid to survive until conflict goes home. That's a top-down approach. It doesn't take into account the agency and abilities that refugees carry with them. People like Anne-Marie's mother, who's a doctor, and refugee crises don't end for an average of 20 or 25 years. So this approach doesn't make sense. So what should the future look like? The future needs to be one where refugees have opportunities to integrate more fully into their host communities and countries. It has to be one where refugees have the opportunity to use their talents and skills to support themselves and make their communities better. And so right now, we are facing an unprecedented emergency with COVID-19, and we need to support people to survive. And we are endlessly grateful for everybody on this call and all of those who support us, because it's enabled us with private funding to act very quickly to meet the needs of refugees immediately. But while we do that, we have to keep our imagination for the future alive. We have to figure out how, while we support people in place, there can be a pathway to self-reliance, so that when the next crisis hits, when aid is diminished, just like it is now, people are better equipped to survive. That story that Jacob shared with us can be multiplied and multiplied over and over again when you equip people with the necessity and the income generation and other characteristics that will help them survive in these crises. And so while we are responding in this emergency, we have to imagine what the future could look like, and we have to start moving toward that future. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us here. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for giving us your time, your wisdom, your strength, your energy from Nairobi, and all that you do there to support people. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Oh, and Sarah, over to you for closing words.
Yeah, thank you all so much. thank you for those of you who are on the webinar here, and also everyone who's watching us live on Facebook. It took us a minute to get it streaming, but it finally worked. So I just wanted to continue, as Sasha said, note the importance of kind of private funding to, to be able to respond quickly and nimbly. That's what we've been able to do, and that's what we hope to be able to do in the future as well. And I wanted to just note that sometimes, we think you need to have a lot of money to make a difference, but some of the things and the ways that we're responding in Nairobi actually take small amounts of money to make a big difference. A month of rent assistance for a family is about $45. And so just to show you, I mean, the significance of an entire, month of support for a family is something that can be done with a very small amount of money. So everything, everything helps, which I think is something worth noting. The last thing I'd like to just ask everyone to do is to share this panel. If you feel like this was really helpful, let us know, because like I said, we would love to do this more often and with our other program staff as well. So please feel free to email me. My email was in your, I believe it should have been in the email that you got today reminding you about this webinar. The last thing is that we have a post on our Facebook today. We would love for you to share it. It's about, one of our clients that was highlighted today. And it's just a way, I think, that we can get the word out about how important self-reliance really is in the midst of the emergency. So thank you so much, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you in the future.